Hey Acers, glad to see you again, and I hope you enjoyed my little dust bunny find earlier this week. Because yes, I found the life under the couch, and I'm excited to run that at some point in the future. And you can check out my friends Carl Kiesler and others at their Doghouse Rules collection of stuff, which includes Trailer Park Shark Attack and Dust Bunnies. They are doing some great work over there. They're doing some good lighthearted work, which definitely Savage Worlds needs. If you've looked at most of the settings that Pinnacle has, and no complaints about those settings at all, there's really not that many that are silly. And it's nice to have something silly like Dust Bunnies once in a while, just to be able to laugh and have a good time. And that's really that's why I had to back Dust Bunnies. I had to. It was a moral imperative. And take an extra advance for anybody who got that joke, because it's from a movie and it's from a fun movie, and I will probably quote it often. Anyway, I'm also loving going through these situational rules with you guys, because as I'm going through them, I'm getting better at my own game mastering, and I'm getting involved in certain things that I kind of forgot I've been doing wrong. So let's start today really quick. And first of all, if you're new to the channel, welcome. This is the newest of the videos in a series in which we're going through the situational rules for the Savage Worlds role-playing game. And I'm kind of giving you examples of how I would use them and apply them. So I'm not going to go all the way into the language that they're using in the book. I'm going to focus on making sure that you kind of have an idea how it would work. And so let's talk about surprise. Surprise! Surprise is when, like, you've got an ambush or something like that, and it's not the drop. And I think that's a place that I might have in the past made a mistake. So let's talk about surprise. And surprise works like this. You got the ambush, and basically everybody who's doing the ambush starts on hold. You get dealt in at normal just in case there's a joker in there as well. But you start on hold, and you can interrupt anybody. Now, if you remember back on, or at least you can interrupt on a roll. And I will pull back up real quick to being on hold, just to make sure that I read this correctly, because this is an important... Hold is an important piece of combat. And it basically means that you can resolve your turn later in the round. And when you go to interrupt somebody else's action, you make an opposed athletics roll. That's the skill athletics. So whoever rolls the highest goes first. And it could be simultaneous. So going back then to... I'm going to get back here to surprise. Going back to surprise here, what you're looking at then is when you interrupt somebody else's action, you are going to be able to make an athletics roll against them. Now, the victims of the attack, before they get attacked, can make a notice roll. If they haven't already, maybe that's a key that the ambushers are sneaking up on them. So our team's going to go into this box canyon. We don't know that in order to get our cattle back from being chased down this box canyon, the bad guys have set up top, and they're going to ambush us down. So I'm going to have you guys make a notice roll. In some cases, people are going to fail, and they're not going to be dealt a card in that moment of combat. But that's also thinking like a game master too. Because sometimes we don't use our situational rules to make our villains harder to defeat. Sometimes we put our big bad, we build everything to putting our big bad in, and our big bad gets one-shotted. And we're like, what the heck? Why did that happen? Why isn't that working? And that's partially because we don't use the situational rules. No villain should ever meet the good guys on their terms. No villain should ever meet the good guys with them at full health and full strength. So if you can have your villain meeting your heroes when they have 3 wounds and 2 points of fatigue, and they're just one smack away from going down, that's when the villain comes in and taunts them and makes fun of them and ha 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 ha. And does the next thing that we're going to talk about. And that's, oh, and another thing, if you're using situational rules, and we'll get into some of these in like hazards when we get into hazards and the adventurer toolkit. When we get into that, we're going to talk about hazards like smoke and fire and things like that. And why don't you, if you're going to have, say we're doing a fantasy, why don't you have the villain step through a gap in a wall of fire or a wall of smoke, and when the heroes try and take shots at them, that's when you deal in combat and you deal in an extra card, and the hero's like, wait a minute, what's that extra card for? And you're like, the archers that are standing behind the smoke wall that can see you and you can't see them, and they're all going to now shoot a dozen arrows down in at you guys because there's a dozen archers. You guys were so focused on the smoke wall or the firewall and the villain that you didn't see these guys. And so that's kind of a use of surprise that can work. So let's talk though about when the villain or your heroes make a test on their opponent. Now, unlike support, where you're supporting one of your teammates to give them a little more of an advantage, a better ability to hit the villain, now they're testing against the villain. They're trying to throw sand in their eyes. They're going, nanny, nanny, poo, poo. I said poo, poo on this video. Yes, I did. But anyway, they're doing all these kind of things to try and get the attacker or get their opponent to not be able to attack or damage the other heroes. So you're just making things more difficult. So what you do is you let the player describe what the action is, and together you and the player decide, okay, here's the skill that best applies to this. The person making the test, the attacker, they make a skill roll. So it could be taunt, it could be persuade, it could be fighting, it could be shooting. But if you're shooting as a test, it's not going to do damage. So that's kind of covered in the suppressing fire kind of thing. But being as it's a test, it's going against it's the skill of the player or the attacker rolled against the attribute of the opponent. So that's why when you look at skills like let's go back up and scroll back up here and looking at the skills, say we're looking at taunt. Let's take a look at taunt. And that is when you attack the person's pride through ridicule, cruel jest, one-upmanship, jokes, things like that. And it's opposed by the opponent's smarts. Just as persuasion is opposed by somebody's spirits. Now, it can be used to support or test, and you can do one of those actions on your turn. And can you do a multi-attack and do a persuade and a taunt in the same round? Absolutely. But remember, there's the multi-action penalty of -2 to each action. So you got to be on your toes for that. At least that's my ruling. And that's the thing, is that your ruling is the final ruling. So that's all that really matters. Now, if the attacker wins the opposed roll, they can choose to make their opponent distracted or vulnerable. And remember that distracted is the foe gets a -2 to everything they do. Vulnerable makes it so everything done against the foe is at a +2. And here's the kicker, is that if you get the raise, you also get to make them shaken. So you can shake them using a non-physical source. So they're either distracted or vulnerable, and they're shaken. Use this against your players. Let the villains, even the mooks try these kind of tactics. Because part of it is, one, you're showing your players what to do and how to do it. And two, you're also putting them at a disadvantage and making it so your mooks can, if you got mooks with with pitchforks fighting your rippers because they've been controlled by a vampire, they can be stabbing, and if one of them is willingly working for the vampire, he can look at one of them and say, "Your teeth are all rotten," or something like that. I don't know a really good Victorian era insult. I should research some of those for when I do eventually run Rippers. Which, incidentally, think about this: Rippers is taking place approximately the same time as Deadlands. Think about that for a second. The Wild West and Victorian England and East Coast were happening at the same time. And think about this: the fashions of Paris, which came over to Victorian England, were also in the Wild West. So that's why you have the ladies with their parasols and their bustles and their tight bodices and their hats and all those things. They were all the same period. And that blew my mind when I figured that one out. It took me years to figure that one out. So anyway, one of your team has distracted your villain. And the next person to go, they do a test as well, and they now make the villain vulnerable, and they also got a raise, so now they're shaken. So they're shaken, distracted, and vulnerable. And now the team has a whole bunch of opportunities to just really put the hurt on. Now, here's the other thing. As a game master, it is also up to you to decide if there are any side effects and other effects that happen to the targeted foe. So if one of the tests is a fighting test to trip the villain, they have to make an agility check to not fall on their face. And now, if they do fall on their face, they are now prone on top of being distracted. They're distracted, prone, and maybe there was a raise, so they're shaken. And that is the beauties of tests. Yeah, you can only get distracted, vulnerable, and maybe shaken, but it makes it so maybe that turn, with some support, one person can actually stab that dragon in their open chest plate, in the hole that every dragon has, right? And Tolkien taught us that. Now, a word of warning: you don't want to keep repeating. You don't want to keep repeating the same attack again and again and again and again. And you can also, if you have additional dice, like for high rate of fire or something, you just take your highest die, and that's what you do. Now, to wrap up today's stuff, we're going to talk about touch attacks, because that's a really short and easy thing. But like, when I was a kid, I used to do mountain-man rendezvous with my dad, and we dressed in buckskins, and we wore homespun shirts and all that kind of stuff. And my family, we actually lived every Labor Day weekend up at Fort Bridger in a teepee, an actual teepee. My dad had gone out and cut the poles, and he paid me $20 to skin them. So I was using a draw knife. Oops. Okay. I was using a draw knife and pulling it down the bark, the bark of the wet tree, and getting that bark to just come right off, and getting rid of knots and things like that. So we made these smooth poles, and then we dry them in the sun for about a few more weeks. And then they were these supple and springy poles, but they were like 30 feet long, and 20 feet long, some of them. That was mainly about how long we get them, was 20 feet long. Then we take 3 of them, to make the tripod. We'd tie that off, and we'd tip it up, swing out the pole, and that would be our initial tripod. We would stake that down in the middle to hold it. And then we'd lay all the other poles into the center notch. We'd have a rope that would also dangle down. We would have, well, so we'd have the tripod. Actually, we wouldn't stake it down yet. We'd have the rope that was dangling down, though, and that once all the other poles had been laid in and we'd made the circle that the teepee would wrap around, then we'd run the rope around to cinch them up, and then take one of our smoke flap poles and loop it around one of the top poles, and we'd then run that down the middle of the teepee and take a big spike my dad had and put that in. So anyway, the reason why I got off on this tangent about the teepee and everything like that, incidentally, best camp dwelling I've ever slept in. Better than any tent. You can't cook marshmallows inside of most tents. Anyway, I touched on that because one of the attacks, and so you might use this in a Deadlands game, that would happen is braves of the American Indian tribes would count coup. And that would be, they would ride their horse up, and instead of killing their opponent, especially if it was a strong and powerful opponent, they would touch them with a staff or a stick or even their hands, and then they'd ride back off. And then they would paint sometimes a line on their buckskins of their pants to tell how many times they counted coup, which is a touch attack. And sometimes in Savage Worlds, you might have your braves doing that. You might have some magical effect or something of some kind that has to be activated by touch. So when you're doing a touch attack, you can add +2 to your fighting roll because you're not trying to do something precise like with a weapon or something. So that's an example, though, of touch attacks. And now let's talk about 2 weapons. When you have 2 weapons and you're armed with 2 melee weapons, you get to add +1 to your fighting rolls. So if you're doing like double stabs and stuff like that, you get to add a +1 to your fighting roll. And that is if your foe has a single weapon or is unarmed. So you'd be having to parry off 2 of things. And it also doesn't give any bonus against creatures with natural weapons. Now, having 2 firearms does not give you a special fighting or shooting bonus, but it does give you extra ammo. And if you want to specialize in 2 weapon fighting or the 2 gun fighting, that's 2-fisted for the 2 weapons, and that is the melee version of 2-gun kid. And what those edges do, to remind you, is they take away the -2 penalty for a multi-attack on the second attack. Now, a lot of games just go with ambidextrous, and that's good enough. And that's for most of it is. But Savage Worlds does have ambidextrous as a separate thing. Here's the thing. If you're a right-handed person and you're attacking with your first dagger, that is no penalty because you have 2-fisted. But if you attack with that second dagger, it's your offhand, and you're not as good with that hand as you are with your on hand, essentially. And so that means this one gets a -4. Same with a gun. I'm good with my right hand, bang. But I shoot with my left hand, I'm not as good, bang. So I get a -2 penalty. So there's -2 or -2. It would be a -4 if you're not 2-fisted or 2-gun kid, and you're also doing a multi-attack. Yeah, it's going to be like a -4. So that the 2-fisted or 2-gun kid gets rid of the multi-attack penalty for the second attack. Then ambidextrous gets rid of the offhand penalty. So just remember that when you're doing things like that ambidextrous is probably not the best edge to take first. Take 2-fisted or 2-gun kid, then take ambidextrous. Well, I'm sure that I've shared enough with you guys today, and we're going to pick up with Unarmed Defender next time, and we're going to continue because we're almost done. We have just a few more. Next time might actually be the last of our situational rules. Then I will let you guys kind of just give me feedback here. I want to know if these videos are helping you. I want to know how I can make them more helpful for you. And so leave comments. Let me know how I can help you to become a better game master. And after we've done these situational rules, if you want me to cover adventure toolkit things like allies, or that one I will do a video about just in general for Savage Worlds because it's so cool. And then I also will cover, like, I could talk about chases. And recently, actually, and it just got posted up on YouTube, they talked about some chases and things like that. And we also have vehicles that we can cover how they work in with chases. I could cover dramatic tasks. That will get a video, whether you guys want it or not. No, it's a cool subsystem of Savage Worlds, and I really like. It's one of the things that I love. Dramatic tasks and quick encounters together are two of the things that really, for me, set Savage Worlds apart from other role-playing game systems. But I will also, once I get done with covering Savage Worlds, I'm going to go to other game systems. And I'm going to try and find ways of getting more graphics and things like that in here because I know you guys would like something prettier than just my mug to look at. But hey, you guys are awesome. I'm so glad you're here. I love you. I really do. And I'm grateful that you are here to help me build more Ace role-playing game clubs. And I know that as we get this moving bigger, I mean, I just moved in down the street from another game shop. I still go back to Mythos games, but I am going to see how I can work with Game Haven to help them too, because it's a weird thing, but as an example, you put two martial arts studios in the same place, and they're both going to succeed and succeed more than if you had just one, because people might choose to go to the other school, but their friends are going to come and their friends might decide to come to your school. Either way, both things move forward and the rising tide floats all boats. So this channel is meant to make you a better game master and to help you set up your Ace Role-Playing Games Club. So I hope that you are doing so. And as it sits right now, we have a Savage Worlds table and we have a nice young person who is running D&D for us, and they're having fun in another room. And we have grown-ups who are bouncing back and forth. We have just some great opportunities and some great options here. And like I said, I love you guys for the help that you've been to me and for helping me to get a weekly YouTube channel going. And the world is a better place with you in it. So until next time, this is Mason Emerson with Ace Role-Playing Games Clubs, and we're gaming for good. Have a good day.